The night was dark, with only a sliver of moonlight piercing the heavy clouds that blanketed the sky. The ocean was a vast, inky black expanse, broken only by the imposing silhouette of the pirate ship, the Vengeful Specter. Captain Blackheart, a ruthless and ambitious pirate, stood at the helm, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he unfurled an ancient, tattered map. The ancient map was a piece of parchment, yellowed with age and stained with the blood of those who had died for it. The edges were tattered and fragile, but the ink remained surprisingly vivid, depicting the treacherous route to the fabled cursed treasure. Captain Blackheart had acquired it through deceit and murder, having betrayed a fellow pirate captain and watched as his lifeblood seeped into the very parchment now in his hands. Blackheart gathered his crew in the dimly lit captain's cabin, the air thick with the scent of salt and rum. The lanterns cast flickering shadows on the walls, their light illuminating the map spread out on the large oak table. The room was filled with anticipation as the crew, a motley band of hardened cutthroats, leaned in to get a closer look. Blackheart, his eyes gleaming with fervor, traced a path with his finger along the ancient map. "This is it, men," he declared, his voice resonating with excitement. "The treasure that will make us legends." The map depicted a series of cryptic symbols and markings leading through uncharted waters and islands, ending at a location ominously labeled as Cursed Waters. The crew exchanged eager, greedy glances. The promise of untold riches fueled their imaginations and steeled their resolve. The crew erupted in cheers, their voices filled with a mix of excitement and bloodlust. They were a fearless lot, each man driven by the promise of gold and glory. Scars from countless battles marked their bodies, and their eyes burned with a desire for wealth that could only be quenched by the legendary treasure. "Captain, when do we set sail?" asked Jonas, a burly pirate with a deep scar running down his face. "At first light," Blackheart replied, his voice firm. "Prepare the ship and ensure we have enough supplies. The journey will be long and fraught with danger, but the reward will be worth every drop of blood." At dawn, the Vengeful Specter cut through the morning mist, its sails full and its crew ready for the perilous journey ahead. The ship veered off its usual course, heading into the uncharted waters marked by the map. The familiar seas were left behind as they ventured into the unknown, where the promise of cursed gold awaited. The ocean grew darker and more foreboding as they sailed further from known waters. The sky, once clear, became overcast, and a sense of unease began to settle over the crew. Yet their determination did not waver. They were pirates, after all, men who thrived on danger and lived for the thrill of the chase. Days turned into weeks as the Vengeful Specter navigated the treacherous seas. The journey was anything but smooth. They encountered violent storms that threatened to capsize the ship, and dense fog that left them sailing blind, relying solely on the cryptic map to guide their way. One night, as they sailed through a particularly dense fog, the lookout called down from the crow's nest, his voice filled with alarm. "Ghost ship off the port bow!" The crew rushed to the side, peering through the thick mist. There, looming out of the darkness, was the spectral form of an ancient ship, its sails tattered and its hull rotting. The eerie silence that followed was palpable, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the storm. The ghost ship glided silently towards them, its ghostly crew visible on deck. These spectral sailors, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, seemed to stare directly at Blackheart and his men. The temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. "Prepare for battle," Blackheart shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. The crew scrambled to ready their weapons, their previous excitement now tinged with a hint of fear. As the ghost ship drew closer, the ghostly crew sprang into action, boarding the Vengeful Specter with supernatural speed. The pirates fought bravely, but their weapons passed through the specters as if they were made of smoke. The first casualty was a young sailor, Thomas, who was dragged overboard by a ghostly hand, his screams echoing through the fog. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The spectral invaders showed no mercy, their cold, dead hands tearing through flesh and bone. The deck of the Vengeful Specter was soon slick with blood, the cries of the dying mingling with the eerie silence of the ghost ship. Captain Blackheart, though shaken, managed to repel the ghostly attackers, the spectral ship vanishing as mysteriously as it had appeared. The crew, battered and bloodied, regrouped, their numbers significantly diminished. "We press on," Blackheart declared, his voice filled with grim determination. "The cursed treasure is close, and no ghostly apparitions will stop us." The Vengeful Specter sailed on into the unknown, the crew's resolve hardened by the harrowing encounter. The promise of cursed gold drove them forward, deeper into the uncharted waters where more dangers awaited. As dawn broke, the fog lifted slightly, revealing the dark, ominous sea ahead. The crew, their faces pale and drawn, prepared for whatever horrors lay in wait. The map was their guide, the cursed treasure their goal, and the journey into the heart of darkness had only just begun. Days passed as the Vengeful Specter sailed deeper into uncharted waters, following the cursed map. The once clear skies darkened with ominous clouds, and a perpetual fog surrounded the ship, shrouding it in an eerie, unsettling silence. The sea seemed to stretch endlessly into a void, with no landmarks or familiar sights to reassure the crew. The men, once boisterous and filled with bravado, grew increasingly uneasy. Their laughter and songs faded into hushed whispers and furtive glances. The oppressive fog and the relentless sense of foreboding weighed heavily on their spirits. They felt as if they were being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking their every move. One night, as the fog thickened to an almost impenetrable wall, the lookout high in the crow's nest let out a terrified cry. "Ghost ship off the starboard bow!" The crew rushed to the ship's railings, peering into the dense mist. Their eyes strained to see through the gloom, hearts pounding in their chests. Slowly, the ghostly shape of a ship began to emerge from the fog. Its sails were tattered and flapping soundlessly in the still air, and its hull was rotting and covered in barnacles. The vessel glided silently towards them, an apparition from the depths of their worst nightmares. The Vengeful Specter's crew stood frozen in terror, their eyes wide and unblinking as the ghost ship drew closer. The spectral vessel was manned by the spirits of dead sailors, their hollow eyes glowing with a sinister, otherworldly light. These ghostly figures moved with an eerie grace, their translucent forms flickering like candles in the wind. The air grew frigid and the stench of decay filled the crew's nostrils, making them gag and choke. The once calm sea began to churn, and the waters around the two ships seemed to boil with an unnatural fury. The fog thickened further, wrapping around the vessels like a suffocating shroud. Without warning, the ghost ship rammed into the Vengeful Specter with a force that sent men sprawling across the deck. The sound of splintering wood and creaking timbers echoed through the night as the two ships became entangled. The ghostly crew swarmed onto the Vengeful Specter, moving with supernatural speed and precision. The living pirates scrambled to defend their ship, drawing swords and pistols, but their weapons proved useless against the spectral invaders. The ghosts seemed to phase in and out of reality, their forms shifting and flickering with each movement. Bullets passed through them harmlessly, and swords met no resistance as they swung through the air. The spectral sailors attacked with a fury born of centuries of torment. One pirate, a burly man named Jack, was grabbed by a ghostly hand. He screamed as the cold, spectral fingers tightened around his throat, lifting him off the deck. His eyes bulged, and his face turned a sickly shade of blue before the ghost threw him into the sea, his body disappearing beneath the churning waves. Another pirate, Edward, was slashed across the chest by a ghostly cutlass. The blade passed through him like a knife through butter, leaving a deep, bloody gash. He fell to his knees, clutching at the wound as blood poured out, pooling on the deck. His life ebbed away, his screams fading into a gurgling choke. Captain Blackheart, his face twisted with rage and fear, rallied his men. "Fight, damn you! Defend our ship!" He swung his cutlass at a ghostly sailor, the blade passing harmlessly through the Spectre. The ghost retaliated, its cold, dead eyes locking onto Blackheart as it reached out with a skeletal hand. Blackheart felt an icy chill as the hand gripped his arm, draining his strength. With a roar of defiance, he broke free, stumbling back and clutching his arm where the ghost had touched him. The crew fought desperately, but the ghostly sailors were relentless. They moved through the living pirates with ease, their spectral forms immune to any attack. Men were thrown overboard, slashed to ribbons, or dragged into the shadows, their screams of terror and pain filling the night. As quickly as it had begun, the assault ceased. The ghost ship began to pull away, its spectral crew retreating back to their vessel. The Vengeful Specter's deck was littered with the bodies of the fallen, their blood mingling with the seawater that sloshed across the timbers. The surviving crew members were left gasping for breath, their eyes wide with shock and horror. The ghost ship vanished into the fog as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving behind an eerie silence. The air was still frigid, and the stench of decay lingered, a grim reminder of the night's events. Captain Blackheart stood amidst the carnage, his face pale and drawn. He looked at the remaining crew, their faces etched with fear and despair. "We press on," he declared, his voice firm but trembling slightly. "The cursed treasure is close, and no ghostly apparitions will stop us." The men, though shaken, nodded in agreement. They had come too far to turn back now. The promise of cursed gold drove them forward, deeper into the uncharted waters where more dangers awaited. The Vengeful Specter, battered and bloodied, sailed on through the fog. The crew, their numbers dwindled, prepared for the next leg of their journey. The map remained their guide, the cursed treasure their goal, and the journey into the heart of darkness continued. The eerie silence that followed the collision was shattered by the unearthly wails of the ghostly crew as they swarmed onto the Vengeful Specter. These spectral figures, moving with an unnatural speed, seemed to materialize from the shadows, their translucent forms flickering in and out of existence. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and their ghostly weapons, although ethereal, caused real damage. The pirates, though hardened by countless battles, found themselves utterly unprepared for the otherworldly invaders. They drew their swords and pistols, but their weapons proved useless against the ghosts. Swords passed harmlessly through the specters, and bullets seemed to disappear into the air. Chaos erupted on the deck as the pirates fought back with everything they had. Their screams of terror and rage mingled with the ghostly wails, creating a cacophony of sound that echoed across the dark waters. The crew's bravado quickly turned to panic as they realized their attacks were futile. Captain Blackheart, his face a mask of rage and fear, swung his cutlass at a ghostly sailor. The blade passed through the spirit, leaving it unaffected. The ghost retaliated with a speed that took Blackheart by surprise, its cold, spectral hand gripping his throat. He gasped as an icy chill spread through his body, feeling his life force being drained away. Summoning every ounce of his strength, Blackheart managed to break free from the ghost's grip, stumbling backward and clutching his throat. The cold lingered, a stark reminder of the ghost's touch, but he steeled himself, knowing he had to fight on. Jonas, a burly pirate known for his strength and fearlessness, was the first to fall. He fought valiantly, swinging his cutlass with wild abandon, but the ghosts were too many and too fast. A ghostly figure, its eyes glowing with an eerie light, lunged at him. Its spectral hand plunged into Jonas's chest, phasing through flesh and bone with ease. Jonas's eyes widened in shock and pain as the ghost's hand emerged from his chest, clutching his still beating heart. Blood sprayed across the deck in a gruesome arc, splattering nearby pirates and adding to the chaos. The ghost held the heart aloft, the faint rhythmic pulsing slowing until it stopped. Jonas's body collapsed in a lifeless heap, his face frozen in an expression of agony. The sight of his mangled corpse, blood pooling around him, sent a wave of panic through the remaining crew. They had faced death before, but this was something beyond their worst nightmares. The ghostly crew showed no mercy. They moved through the pirates like wraiths, their spectral forms flickering in the dim light. Each ghost attacked with ruthless efficiency, their cold, dead hands tearing through flesh and bone. One pirate, Edward, screamed as a ghostly sword sliced through his abdomen, spilling his entrails onto the deck. He fell to his knees, clutching at the gaping wound as blood and viscera poured out. Another pirate, Richard, tried to fend off a ghost with his pistol, but the spectral figure simply walked through the shot, its eyes locked onto his. The ghost reached out, its hand phasing through Richard's chest and squeezing his heart. Richard gasped, his eyes bulging as his life was snuffed out, his body collapsing in a lifeless heap beside Jonas. Captain Blackheart, though surrounded by death and chaos, refused to give in. His mind raced as he sought a way to combat the spectral invaders. He barked orders, trying to rally his men, but their fear was palpable. The deck of the Vengeful Specter was slick with blood, and the bodies of fallen pirates littered the ground. Blackheart found himself face to face with the ghostly pirate captain. The Specter's eyes burned with a dark, ancient hatred. "You cannot escape your fate," the ghostly captain intoned, its voice echoing with the weight of centuries. Summoning his courage, Blackheart lunged forward, his cutlass aimed at the ghost's heart. But the blade passed through the Spectre harmlessly. The ghostly captain retaliated, its hand shooting out and gripping Blackheart's wrist with an ironclad grip. The cold seeped into Blackheart's bones and he felt his strength ebbing away. With a roar of defiance, Blackheart twisted free, his vision blurring as he staggered back. The ghostly captain laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the night. "You cannot defeat us," it said. "Your souls are forfeit." The surviving pirates, their numbers dwindling rapidly, fought with a desperation born of fear. They knew they were outmatched, but they refused to go down without a fight. Their swords swung wildly, their pistols fired in vain, and their screams of defiance mingled with the ghostly wails. The deck of the Vengeful Specter became a battlefield of the living and the dead. Blood soaked the timbers, and the air was filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. The ghostly crew, relentless and unstoppable, continued their assault, each pirate they claimed, adding to their ranks. As the night wore on, the attack finally began to wane. The ghostly crew retreated back to their spectral ship, leaving the Vengeful Specter battered and bloodied. The surviving pirates, their faces pale and haunted, gathered around Captain Blackheart. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the deck was a gruesome tableau of blood and bodies. "We press on," Blackheart declared, his voice hoarse but resolute. "The cursed treasure is close, and we will not be deterred." The Vengeful Specter sailed on into the darkness, its crew driven by a mix of fear, desperation, and the insatiable lust for cursed gold. The ghostly encounter had shaken them, but their resolve was unbroken. They would face whatever horrors awaited them, for the promise of unimaginable wealth was too great to abandon. As dawn approached, the ghost ship vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, dissolving into the dense fog that surrounded the Vengeful Specter. The crew, now decimated, surveyed the blood-soaked deck in stunned silence. The bodies of their fallen comrades lay strewn about, their lifeless eyes staring blankly into the void. The survivors tended to their wounds with trembling hands, their spirits broken, but their resolve hardened by the harrowing encounter. Captain Blackheart stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the cursed map. "We press on," he muttered, his voice hoarse but resolute. The promise of the cursed treasure drove them forward, a beacon in the darkness of their despair. The ocean grew increasingly treacherous as the Vengeful Specter ventured deeper into uncharted waters. The once calm seas became a roiling, turbulent mass, the waves crashing against the hull with violent force. The sky remained overcast, and a perpetual gloom hung over the ship, adding to the sense of foreboding that gripped the crew. Dark shapes moved beneath the surface, their presence hinted at by the occasional ripple or shadow. The crew whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with fear and awe. They spoke of the sea monsters that were said to protect the cursed treasure, creatures of legend and nightmare that had claimed the lives of countless sailors. One evening, as the ship sailed through a narrow strait, the tension reached its peak. The water around them was eerily calm, the surface smooth and undisturbed. The crew moved about the deck with hushed voices, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Without warning, the water erupted in a frenzy of movement. Enormous tentacles, slick and glistening with seawater, shot up from the depths, wrapping around the ship with crushing force. The crew screamed in terror as the monstrous appendages began to drag men overboard, pulling them into the watery abyss. Thomas, a wiry sailor known for his agility, found himself caught in the grip of one of the monstrous tentacles. He struggled desperately, his screams echoing across the water as the tentacle tightened around him. The pressure was unbearable, and he felt his bones snapping like twigs. His cries of pain turned to gurgles as blood filled his mouth, his body convulsing in the tentacle's grip. The tentacle lifted Thomas high into the air, his broken body dangling helplessly. With a final, brutal motion, the tentacle slammed him down onto the deck, the impact shattering his bones and sending a spray of blood and viscera across the planks. His lifeless form lay crumpled in a pool of blood, a gruesome testament to the sea monster's wrath. The remaining crew fought desperately against the monstrous tentacles, their weapons clashing uselessly against the thick, rubbery flesh. The tentacles moved with terrifying speed and precision, plucking men from the deck and dragging them into the depths. The water churned with blood as the sea monsters feasted on their prey. Captain Blackheart, his face contorted with rage and fear, barked orders to his men. "Fight back! Use the cannons! We must drive them off!" The crew scrambled to load the cannons, their hands shaking with fear. They fired into the water, the cannonballs splashing into the depths and sending shockwaves through the sea. For a moment it seemed as though the attack had halted, but then the tentacles returned with renewed fury. The sea monster's assault was relentless. Tentacles wrapped around the masts, snapping them like twigs and sending the sails crashing to the deck. The ship groaned under the strain, its timbers creaking and splintering as the monstrous appendages tightened their grip. One sailor, Richard, was yanked overboard, his screams cutting through the night air. The water around him turned crimson as the sea monsters tore him apart, his blood mingling with the salt water in a gruesome display. His cries were abruptly silenced as he disappeared beneath the waves, his fate sealed in the depths of the ocean. Captain Blackheart, his face pale but determined, stood his ground. He knew that their only chance of survival was to press on, to find the cursed treasure that had lured them into this nightmare. "We cannot give up," he shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. "The treasure is close. We must reach it." The crew, driven by a mix of desperation and the promise of unimaginable wealth, rallied around their captain. They fought with renewed vigor, their weapons slashing and stabbing at the tentacles that threatened to drag them to their doom. As the night wore on, the sea monster's assault finally began to wane. The tentacles, bloodied and battered by the crew's fierce defense, withdrew into the depths, leaving the Vengeful Specter a battered but still floating wreck. The survivors, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, gathered on the deck, their eyes fixed on the horizon. "We press on," Blackheart repeated, his voice a hoarse whisper. The cursed treasure was close, and nothing would deter them from their goal. The ship, though battered and bloodied, sailed on into the darkness, the promise of cursed gold driving them forward. The Vengeful Specter, now a battered shadow of its former self, continued its cursed journey. The once sturdy ship was barely afloat, its hull riddled with cracks and its sails tattered. The ocean around it was a dark, ominous expanse, the sky perpetually overcast and the air growing colder with each passing day. The crew, once a robust band of hardened pirates, had dwindled to a desperate few, their faces drawn and haunted by the horrors they had faced. As they approached the location marked on the cursed map, a palpable sense of malevolence settled over the ship. The very air seemed thick with an unseen force, pressing down on the men and sapping their strength. Whispers of the damned floated on the wind, a constant reminder of the peril that awaited them. One night, as the ship sailed through waters that seemed unnaturally still, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The moon, hidden behind thick clouds, cast an eerie, dim glow over the scene. Suddenly, the water around the ship began to churn, and a chill wind swept across the deck. The spirits of the long-dead pirate king and his crew rose from the depths, their ethereal forms glowing with a sinister light. Their eyes burned with a vengeful fire, and their voices echoed with the curses of the damned. These spectral figures, clad in tattered remnants of pirate garb, floated above the water, their expressions twisted with anger and hatred. Captain Blackheart, clutching the cursed map, stood on the deck, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. The ghostly pirate king, towering and fearsome, drifted towards him. His bony finger pointed directly at Blackheart, and his voice boomed across the deck. "You dare seek my treasure," he intoned, his voice a chilling echo of the past. "You will join the countless souls who have perished for their greed." The ghostly crew swarmed the Vengeful Specter, their ethereal forms flickering in the dim light. They moved with a supernatural speed and precision, their eyes locked onto the living pirates with a hunger for vengeance. The air grew frigid, and the stench of decay filled the nostrils of the terrified crew. The spirits attacked with relentless fury. The pirates, though brave and battle-hardened, found themselves powerless against the ghostly invaders. Swords and pistols were useless against the specters, passing through their forms without causing harm. One by one, the men fell. Richard, a seasoned pirate, tried to fend off a ghostly sailor, but the spirit's cold hand plunged into his chest, phasing through flesh and bone. Richard screamed as his heart was ripped from his body, blood pouring from the wound and splattering onto the deck. His lifeless body crumpled to the ground, his eyes staring blankly into the void. Another pirate, Samuel, was dragged to the edge of the ship by a pair of ghostly hands. His screams of terror filled the air as he was lifted high above the deck and then thrown into the dark, churning waters below. The sea swallowed him whole, his cries abruptly silenced as he disappeared beneath the surface. Captain Blackheart, his face contorted with rage and fear, fought desperately against the ghostly pirate king. He swung his cutlass with all his might, but the blade passed through the specter harmlessly. The ghostly pirate king laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the night. "You cannot defeat me," the ghostly pirate king taunted, his eyes burning with a malevolent light. "Your greed has sealed your fate." Blackheart, driven by desperation, lunged at the ghostly pirate king, but the specter easily sidestepped his attack. The ghostly pirate king's bony hand shot out, gripping Blackheart by the throat. The captain gasped, feeling his life force being drained away. He struggled, but the grip was unyielding, the cold seeping into his bones. Around him, the remaining crew was slaughtered with brutal efficiency. The deck ran red with blood, and the air was filled with the sounds of dying men and the wails of the damned. One pirate, John, was decapitated by a ghostly sword, his head rolling across the deck and coming to a stop at Blackheart's feet. The sight of his comrade's lifeless eyes staring up at him filled Blackheart with a renewed sense of dread. The ghostly crew showed no mercy. They tore through the pirates, their spectral hands ripping out hearts, slashing throats, and dragging men into the depths. The screams of the dying echoed across the water, mingling with the ghostly laughter of the vengeful spirits. The deck of the Vengeful Specter was a blood-soaked battlefield, littered with the bodies of fallen pirates and drenched in the lifeblood of the living. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, mingling with the acrid stench of gunpowder and the cold, damp smell of the sea. The eerie glow of the ghostly spirits cast long, flickering shadows, making the carnage appear even more surreal and nightmarish. Captain Blackheart, panting and bloodied, stood amidst the chaos, his eyes scanning the deck for any remaining crew members. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear, rage, and desperation. The ghostly forms of the Pirate King's crew moved with an otherworldly grace, their eyes burning with malevolent intent as they dispatched the last of Blackheart's men. Suddenly, the ghostly pirate king appeared before Blackheart, materializing from the swirling mists like a vengeful wraith. The specter's eyes blazed with ancient hatred, and his presence seemed to sap the very warmth from the air. Blackheart felt an icy chill grip his heart as he locked eyes with the ghostly figure. "Your greed has led you to your doom, Captain," the pirate king intoned, his voice echoing with the weight of centuries. The words reverberated through the air, each syllable dripping with contempt and wrath. Blackheart, his face contorted with a mix of fear and defiance, raised his cutlass in a final, desperate act of defiance. "I'll not be bested by a ghost," he spat, his voice trembling but resolute. The pirate king's ghostly form flickered and shifted, his expression one of cold amusement. With a swift, powerful motion, he raised his spectral sword and plunged it into Blackheart's chest. Blackheart gasped, his eyes widening in shock and pain as the cold, ethereal blade pierced his heart. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt, an icy, burning agony that seemed to freeze his very soul. Blood poured from the wound, a crimson torrent that soaked his clothes and pooled at his feet, staining the deck with the evidence of his mortality. He tried to cry out, but his voice was a strangled whisper, his strength ebbing away with each passing second. The pain was all-consuming, a searing, unrelenting torment that left him breathless and trembling. As Blackheart's vision began to blur, the edges of the world fading into darkness, he fell to his knees. The cold, unforgiving deck of the Vengeful Specter felt like ice beneath him. His grip on the cutlass slackened, the weapon falling from his grasp and clattering to the blood-soaked wood. The last thing Blackheart saw was the ghostly pirate king's triumphant smile, his teeth gleaming with a malevolent light. The specter's eyes, filled with ancient hatred and cold satisfaction, seemed to bore into Blackheart's very soul, as if claiming it for the cursed waters. Darkness consumed him, a cold, suffocating void that swallowed him whole. His last breath escaped his lips as a faint, ragged whisper, and his body slumped forward, lifeless and defeated. The cursed waters had claimed yet another soul, and the legend of Captain Blackheart had come to a tragic, inevitable end. As the ghostly pirate king withdrew his spectral sword, Blackheart's lifeless body lay crumpled on the deck, surrounded by the remains of his fallen crew. The Vengeful Specter, now a ghost ship itself, drifted aimlessly through the cursed waters, its deck a grisly tableau of blood and death. The ghostly crew of the Pirate King, their vengeance sated, began to fade back into the shadows, their ethereal forms dissolving into the mist. The eerie glow that had illuminated the deck began to dim, leaving the ship shrouded in darkness once more. The cursed treasure of the Pirate King remained hidden, protected by the vengeful spirits and bloodthirsty sea monsters that roamed the depths. The legend of Captain Blackheart and his doomed crew lived on, a chilling tale of greed, supernatural horror, and the eternal curse of the sea. The Vengeful Specter, a ghostly reminder of the dangers of coveting cursed gold, sailed on through the darkness, its crew forever trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The cursed waters were silent once more, the souls of the damned whispering their eternal lament, and the cycle of vengeance and greed continued.
If you enjoyed our extended audio storytelling, please give us a like and share. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get more of Dr. Mortis Cadaver's collections. Your support helps us continue to bring you the most chilling and thrilling tales from the depths of Dr. Mortis Cadaver's vault. Thank you for listening, and remember, the darkness is always waiting, just around the corner.